Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hey there, Sarah here. Before you dive into today's episode, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support and for hitting that play button. If you want to expand on that support, here are 3 ways that you can do so. 1. Leave a review. If anything in today's episode resonated with you, or you want to share how the podcast changed your life, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. 2. Check out our shop. The Rough Edges shop is a faith-based, women of color-owned online shop where you can get a variety of products from tote bags, journals, t-shirts, crew necks, and more. 20% of the proceeds go to a mental health organization. So check it out at roughedgespodcast.com/shop. 3. Connect on social media. Rough Edges is on a variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more. If you want to connect outside of listening to the podcast episodes, you can do so on those platforms. If you have any more questions or want more information on the ways that I've just discussed, you can check out the episode description or stay to the end for more information. Now, enjoy your episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. Her name is Paris Scobie. Paris is the host of the top 2% globally ranked podcast called Live Well Bipolar. And she's also the best-selling author of her memoir, Crooked Illness, Lessons from Inside and Outside Hospital Walls. Paris was first diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder at 19 and went back to work at the same hospital where she was a patient when she was 22. She is a speaker for NAMI and has been featured on ABC 15, bphope magazine, and over 50 podcasts sharing her experiences living with bipolar and how it's possible to live well with bipolar. Welcome, Paris.
Sarah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back on the podcast. And I always love our conversations and just, getting into these topics and being able to have a place to share all this with someone like you who understands this.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you back on the podcast. I know you were on the podcast before. It was probably like around last year, and I'm excited to have you back. And before we dive into our conversation for today, I want to know, what are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
Okay, I love that question because I feel like if I had to pick 3 things, the top 3 things that I'm most passionate about, I would say the first one is family and my relationship. So really making the time to continue to strengthen those, pour into those, show up for those people, and then also just how much that they've been able to be there for me in my support network. So I'm really, really passionate about that. Second thing, super passionate about these kind of conversations. So whether it's on my podcast, inside of, people reaching out about reading my book, just getting those connections and having more conversations where people are saying, hey, I was recently diagnosed, or here's my story, and just learning more and throwing out things that are worked or have not worked for me. So number 1, family. Number 2, these conversations around mental health and bipolar disorder. And number 3 is just really continuing to prioritize my mental health. So routine, habits, self-talk, all that wrapped into what my routine is and how that trickles into having these conversations and my relationships overall. So those, I would probably say those top 3 for sure.
Yes. Oh, I really love that, especially about the conversations surrounding mental health. Because I agree with you. Like, having these conversations makes you feel less alone, and also it makes you, like, connect with, like, such awesome people that are sharing the same experiences as you. So, yeah, I really appreciate that too. So, parents, tell me a little bit more about your mental health journey. Like, how did you first get diagnosed?
Yeah, so my original diagnosis to start was with depression. So that was at 16 years old. And then I was not diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder until I was 19. So hospitalized at 19 years old. And then we had that gap, obviously, from my diagnosis at 16. So 17, 18. And that was because I didn't have my first manic episode until 19 with my hospitalization. Only up until that point, it was only all my experiences with that depression. So from 16, 17, 18, and then right on the end of being 19 is when I had that experience. So hospitalization, diagnosis, and really, to tell you the truth, I didn't really start doing the work on myself. And when I say the work, I mean just research into bipolar disorder, boundaries, what I need to change about myself and my life. And I actually had a really good conversation yesterday that was completely out of the blue, which I think are sometimes the best ones, where I got a message from somebody and she was reaching out that she, found podcasts or something. And I actually had sent her a voice note. So I sent her a voice note back and we ended up going back and forth. And she said, I'm 24 years old and I'm just starting this work. And I was like, listen, I was the same age as you. And she's like, I was recently diagnosed. And I said, she was diagnosed 24, I was diagnosed 19. But she said, it's just so helpful to be able to talk to someone like this. And I look back on my younger self and I was like, wow, like I would have never thought to do any of that stuff until I was around her age, right? At 24. So right around, 23 years old, and now I'm 28. So 5 years of doing this work and really looking at all aspects of my life, not just my medication, not just my therapy, and not just the past, but what things can I control and what things do I have the power to make better and, pour into that can come out and give me a better outcome than where I'm at right now. So really, to start it off is that was my history with the diagnosis, and I had a lot of hurdles that I had to get into and overcome. But really, since we had our last conversation on your podcast, probably about a year ago, I think this is a pretty good conversation now because this year just has been actually the busiest year of my life with getting married in March. I had bachelorette in February, March got married, April I moved into a house, May through June, honeymoon in Europe, which was obviously really fun, but a big change, right? Time change, different place, all those things. And then came back in July and started a new career and had in the middle of that a lot of good things happen, but a lot of bad things as well. So really that has played a big impact on my ability to live a good quality life with bipolar, and there's always going to be obstacles in the road, as you know. So yeah, just wanted to break down the timeline a little bit.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing cuz I agree with you that there are so many different elements that we don't really first like know about when we first get diagnosed. At least for me personally, like I also share that sentiment where it's just like, okay, you get the diagnosis, but then it's like, okay, what do I do now? And you don't really know how to feel about it, and you also don't know the information that's available because it's something that's very new. That leads me into what I wanted to ask, like, as a follow up question. It's like, how did you feel after you got your diagnosis? Like, what was your mindset during that moment? And how did your perspective on mental health change after you got your diagnosis?
Yeah, I love that question because I feel like it really takes me back to that moment of, for me, being in the hospitalization, getting my diagnosis, bipolar 1 disorder, SMI, court ordered treatment. So, SMI is severe mental illness. I was court ordered to attend a clinic, appointments, blood draws, labs, all of this. And for me, initially, I've been saying prior to my diagnosis, I think that I have bipolar disorder because it runs in my family. And I would go online and Google different things and look at symptoms. And I feel like I'm experiencing a lot of these. I was like, I'm working two jobs right now. I'm in school full time. I'm not tired. My sleep is all over the place, completely unorganized. My thoughts are all over the place, just super irritable, so many issues in relationships and different things like that. So for me, when I got the diagnosis, I was like, okay, well, I've been thinking this all along. So at least, okay, this might make sense on what's going on. But the other side of me was scared because of the stigma that I've seen play out in my experiences in my family with of someone else who has a diagnosis and wasn't comfortable, outwardly talking about that, but then that person was really shamed within my family. So I was like, okay, now this is going to be me because now I have a diagnosis, so it's going to turn around and be like that. So it was both a good and a bad experience for me.
Wow, that is something also about like what you said about the stigma, because that is something that could be so crippling, where it's just like, especially since you've seen it firsthand, like with a family member, like the amount of shame that comes with it. And it's just so interesting to see that despite that experience that you had, like witnessing somebody else who was, stigmatized, unfortunately, you were able to take that and say, you know what? I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to do my research. I'm going to, expand my knowledge about this so that way I can learn how to heal and manage that as well.
Yeah, and when you say that, that was really what I wanted to do all along for many years. So I was diagnosed at 19, and obviously we have that time period. So 19 years old, 20, 21, 22, and then 23. So almost 5 years later when I really started to heavily invest in doing this work. But I feel like initially coming out of the hospital, I didn't really make any changes. I was going to my appointments, I was taking my medication, I was listening to everything I was supposed to be doing on paper, but I was never taught in the system that you need to do more than that. It's not just take this pill that you're given, go to your appointments. You need to really look at your whole life because a lot of the issues that I was facing had to do with past traumas that were patterns from that kept repeating in other relationships, whether that's romantic relationships, friendships, family, healing those relationships, or just setting those boundaries. I didn't do any of that. So I feel like I was really able to learn these things by and I started to start getting into, okay, I'm not going to go out as much. And I started trying to set these boundaries. And I had a lot of the people that were my friends at the time being like, okay, so you don't want to go out anymore. You don't want to go out to the clubs with us. You don't want to drink. You don't want to. And I'm like, all of those things were so damaging for me because I did it to run away. I was trying to escape. I was trying to distract myself. I wasn't really facing, why am I doing this? Why am I going out all the time? Why am I drinking or partying or doing all these things? What is the reason for it? I didn't even know. I just kept doing it. So I feel like I was starting to try to set those boundaries. I was struggling because I had this reaction from these people being like, oh no, like you're not going to drink. You're being boring. You're being lame. And it's like, and I felt really bad about it, but I struggled with that for a little bit. And then I finally had that moment where I'm like, I'm not putting up with this. When I first started my podcast, it was January 31st of 2020. So I remember I didn't know what I was doing. I had no, I just hit record, started talking. I was in the backyard. You can hear the rocks crunching, and I didn't even know what to call the podcast. I didn't even know. No, I just was like, I'm just going to hit publish. I didn't do it. That's what I did. And I remember I was so excited, and I'm like, I'm finally being more open and trying to talk about my story. And I remember sending the podcast out to like all my friends and everyone I knew. I remember having like a friend actually respond to me and be like, can you not send this? Can you stop sending this? Like, I don't even listen to podcasts really. And like, this isn't really my thing. And I feel like it made me feel like, see, this is probably why it's not worth it but I feel like what I learned is you really find your audience and your community and your people the more that you do something and the more that you show up without having like needing those people, because that was really my experience and cutting those people out. I cut all those people out. I stopped doing those things. I made a lot of changes to my lifestyle, my diet, all the things that you hear about that you think, okay, cool, like you work out, you drink your water, like, ooh, like how does that affect your mental health? But really, there's so many different blocks that come together to really form this foundation. And when you start pulling them apart, like you're not exercising, you're not eating good, you're not journaling, you're not going to therapy, you start taking all of those little pieces out, it's going to fall apart. Your foundation is going to fall apart. It's going to crumble. You're going to be unhappy, irritable, and it's going to affect your thoughts, your relationships, and how you treat the world.
Yes. Oh, that was powerful right there. Oh, I love that imagery because it's so true. It's like there are so many elements to healing. And I also love what you said about finding your community because I also experienced that where it's like you disclose like, hey, I am dealing with this. This is what I'm diagnosed with. And people, they either A, want to support you, or B, they don't know what to do with it, so they shy away from it. And the thing is about that also, it's like, okay, if you told them and they shied away from it, that means it wasn't for them. And that means, not everybody that goes with you can grow with you, you know? So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing about that as well.
Yeah, and I love what you said about, not everyone who goes with you can grow with you. So keeping those, and that's what I've started to see this year is I had a lot of loss this year, a lot of loss in terms of relationships that I did not see ever. I thought these were like long-term people. I'm like, this is like after I went through, and especially, and it was very difficult because I feel like it's happening for a reason. So I'm like, these people were removed from my life for a reason. And it was very hurtful to have that because I'm like, a lot of these people were very close to me. They knew my entire story. They were amazing people. And all of a sudden I started to see these people, really start to have, just not show up for me and really just be really cruel and rude. And I'm finding myself in tears and really emotional and I found myself accepting that, like how I used to in my previous relationships. I was like, oh, they're not really bad people. But it's like if someone's going to make you feel like such a bad person, for an example I can give you is, going out and drinking. And I remember one time getting drunk one time, and I don't do that as often. I really honestly can tell you I made so much changes, and having that one experience and having someone holding that over you and they know what a trigger that is for you, how much you've worked on this, and saying, well, what if this is going to happen again? What am I going to do? What, you do this. And it's just very critical of me. And, like not seeing the me and what the progress I'm making, but oh, you drank one time and
Mm,
that shows who you are. And I was like, and me continuously trying to reach out and say, I want to understand where you're coming from, but really just being like ran over by people. And just it's like and I started to realize like this is happening for a reason, because I would have let these relationships stay because I'm showing up for them, but and it's like it's not okay. It's not okay. And I feel like that kind of resulted in me being very hard on myself this year when it comes to alcohol. And like I've made a lot of changes over the years, like over the past 5 years, I would say. Like I used to drink a lot, like everyone, when they're younger, okay, go out, party, kind of have that phase. But I've, since limited that to like I've, at this point this year was probably like, oh, I drink on the weekends, or I drink maybe 3 times a week or whatever. I had a lot of, but when you're constantly made to feel like a bad person, like something's wrong,
mm,
and I've had a lot of loss with that. And then some other triggers come up this year as well, with just previous, going through sexual assault, having that come up from a previous environment that I'm not in anymore, which is amazing. But I had a lot of good things happen as well. So, my wedding, the honeymoon, which was an amazing experience because like that's the thing, is to be able to go to Europe for a month with my husband, take that time off and really explore that and like learn about other cultures and really just have that time and do that. And just it was amazing. And I feel like I like to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, here's the bad things, but here's what I learned from it. And here's what it taught me about myself. I was really proud of how I handled many conflicts and situations that came up this year because I've been able to resolve actually a number of them. Yeah, I mean, we're always a work in progress.
absolutely. And I really appreciate like you sharing about just trying to reconcile like those relationships, because the thing about it is when you have a diagnosis like this, it's kind of hard to like reconcile that past self, like pre-diagnosis versus post-diagnosis, because oh my gosh, like it's just so hard because you're like, wow, I was like quote unquote functioning before, but now it's like I'm hyper aware of like all of my triggers, all of the things that don't work for me as much. And I just want to encourage you and also anyone listening, like, you are growing. So it's okay. It's okay to be in like trial and error, because hey, you're figuring out like what's working for you and what's going to help you and impact you in your healing process. So, girl, I am so proud of you and I appreciate all that you have done to share your story, because also you impacted my life as well. Because when I first got diagnosed, I was looking for people to listen to because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And your podcast was definitely one of the podcasts that I listened to like religiously, because I was like, I need information. And I'm so blessed to have just taken in like the story that you were so bold and courageous to share. So thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that. And I love hearing that and just being able to like have connected to you like from this way. And just that's the thing. That's really the power of our stories, you guys, is like, we it's scary to put it out there, but I feel like for me, like really what I've learned is just in the loss of relationships or just everything in my past. That's the thing is your people are going to show up for you and they're going to be behind you. And it's the people who aren't are gonna fall off. And that's the thing is, and that's really what I've decided, like been able to learn this year is, I have so much clarity now on what matters to me and what is a priority, instead of I need to say yes to everything. I need to do all the things. I can't make anyone unhappy or any of this stuff. I really never had that mentality. And now, from really just having more of these conversations and really seeing the ways in which everyone's stories has impacted me by being able to share this and, being able to connect with people who are like, hey, I, found like literally like when you talked about like I found your podcast and I was listening and I was newly diagnosed. And that's like, I wish if I could go back in time, that's what I would do. I would, if I was newly out of the hospital, because I didn't even know what a podcast was when I was 19. I stopped doing those things. I stopped reading books. I really love to read. I stopped doing that. I stopped running. I just, all I would do is go out, party, meet people, meet whatever guys I was on some dating apps, and just really trying to forget a lot of the traumas that I was trying to bury. And I was trying to bury it by stacking on more. And it was making it worse. But I'm like, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to keep going. And really, the more that we do that, you're eventually going to reach a breaking point. And I've seen a lot of people have that. And they told me about their experiences. And I'm seeing such a common thread in this is the power of community, the power of support, the power of connecting with people like you and me and others who live with bipolar disorder and having those conversations. So, and just staying consistent with whatever is important to you, because I started doing it. I actually had a little journal and I would write down all my habits and stuff. I just wanted to get clear on, how many days a week am I reading or meditating or journaling or drinking alcohol, or what am I eating? Just I wanted just to see it. And I wanted to do it in the way of not beating myself up, because when I first started it, I really actually did. I was like, I didn't meditate today. I would get like annoyed because when I first started it, I'm like, I should be checking off all the boxes. But if you can stick with, the top things for you, that's really what I found has been helpful for me in navigating all of these big life changes, right? Like the biggest things you can go through at once, like getting married, buying and owning your first home, going through a massive career change, going through loss of relationships, and going out of the country for the first time, like just all these different things back to back to back. Like I really needed to have something in place. And I feel like a big part of that was taking breaks. So I took a break from the podcast, and a lot of people reached out and they're like, I'm actually proud that you did that. They're like, because most people, and I was hard for me. It was hard. But I feel like I did it with a purpose, and I want to show up for people when it makes the most sense. And when I can explain, here's why I've been away, because got married, honeymoon, all these different things, but really
Mhm.
share the real reasons, right? Not everything is picture perfect, right? Not everything was amazing this year. But I have that support system and those people who help me navigate those things. Like I went back to therapy to address a lot of different things coming up. That's really what it is. It's just figuring out what you need in this moment that you're in.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And speaking of sharing your story, at the time of this recording, tomorrow, October 6th, is going to be the 2-year anniversary of your book. Congrats.
Thank you so much. And I just actually was funny because I did a photo shoot actually this week on Tuesday. So I shared a little like behind the scenes stuff, but it was such a great experience because even the woman who was so great, she did my hair. She told me, she's like, I was really excited to meet you because I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 13 years ago. So we were talking back and forth when she was doing my hair, and I just really wanted to celebrate it. And that's what I think we need to do more of for ourselves is celebrate the moments that we're proud of, right? Because I feel like for me, I didn't really do that this much this year because had so much else going on. So I'm like, you know what? I really want to do something for myself and I want to go and, have this photo shoot and get my hair and makeup done and have all these outfits and, bring the book and celebrate that and do a giveaway and announce this and give away 2 copies for the 2-year anniversary. But really more importantly, like hone in on why I told my story in the first place because this book that I wrote that I published 2 years ago, Crooked Illness, that story started before my podcast. I was writing that, like I was working on that. And that's what I named the podcast when I first started it because I didn't even know what to call it. All I knew is that I need to talk. I need to get this out. I need to get my story out there because I kept hiding it. I'm like, I'm done hiding. I'm done acting like everything's fine. I'm going to talk about it. And then I started doing that, but that's really where it came from is I talk about crooked illness and the ways in which that most of the times we can't always see ourselves because we're so close to it. It's us, it's our life, the ways in which we are being crooked to ourselves because of our illness, because of living with bipolar disorder and really recognizing it as a mental illness and as a disability and as a brain health issue that you can actually tangibly see rather than the words of mental and this is what you are and identifying as that, taking that away and really saying that so many of us experience that discrimination because of this diagnosis. And that's what I wanted to do in my book because I wanted to show people here's what it looks like to be in my shoes, go through my hospitalization, and then go back and work at that same hospital years later and really show you guys the full circle and really walk you through what I had to do and the work that it took and still what I'm doing to this day, right? I'm still working on things. I'm still making progress on different things. But really tomorrow is the 2-year anniversary of when I published that story that I never thought that I would. And I did it because of the encouragement from the guests that I had on my podcast.
Wow. That is incredible. And I just wanted to ask, like, how does it feel to like celebrate 2 years of your book's release? Like, that is such a huge milestone. Like, how do you feel? And like, how have you grown in your healing journey since writing the book?
I love that question. So to answer the first part, it feels surreal and it just exciting and hopeful because to me it represents like my story to me represents hope and resilience and being able to move past these obstacles and show other people that you can do it as well. And then also the to answer your other question is how has it changed since publishing the book? How has my healing journey and evolved since then. So I would definitely say since publishing the book, I've done a lot more work still on myself, my own like relationship with myself, and then also my relationships with friends, family, my husband as well. And I remember like a big thing that when I first published it, I was really happy I went back to therapy, worked through a lot of different stuff. And since then, so 2 years later, I have been able to have such an amazing relationship now with my mom that I did not have previously at all in the past. And obviously, like still, since I published my book 2 years ago, there's been a lot of work there, but there still was a lot of breakthroughs that we had where we were able to really connect and, express like understand her point of view and then also have her understand mine and really like that gap and that lack of support that I feel like I'm like, this is really what I needed. And like, I did not have that. And being able to understand her experiences. So, like, having that breakthrough, having the breakthrough in just a lot of my relationships. I remember going back and I remember talking about like just the book launch and knowing that there's a lot of people who were there that aren't in my life anymore. And just realizing and recognizing that, like you're saying, like the people who can still show up and support, but then as life progresses, because when I published my book, I wasn't engaged. I wasn't planning, obviously I was, we're going to get married one day in the future, but it wasn't what it is now, like where this is all real. So, and then also like back in that time too, when I published my story, I still had to have more belief in myself because I still back then, I really didn't think that I would be able to be successful in any kind of career. I actually had a friend reach out to me because of my book, and he said, I think that you would be really good in working in this industry that I work in. So he said, I work in this tech company with, he's like, there's a vertical for healthcare. You already understand the importance of reviews and feedback because you have the podcast, you have your book. And I was like, I kept thinking, like, no, like, I don't know. I don't really do that. Like, that's not really my thing. Like, I'm more mental health focused. And since then, I've been able to, have work in a company where I was actually, the number one person on the team and, being able to actually be successful, which I did not think would be possible. And then to be now where I'm at. And I think a big part of it is I heard this about people living with bipolar when I went back and I worked in the hospital. I didn't like it because I would see a lot of the people I worked around who would say, okay, look, they would openly be like, look at this guy who comes into the clinic and say, okay, well, he works in the sales job and stuff. And that's really what I do. So it's like, oh, he makes whatever money and I don't, and it just felt like so negative. And it's like, it almost was like I remember hearing people like this can't be successful and they can't. And for me, I always associated that with being successful in a career. And I feel like a big milestone that since publishing my book that, I did have when I did publish it is, being able to make six figures in a career. And like, that was, I don't know why, like that was always a goal of mine because I felt like I never could have it. I'm like, that is never something that I can have because of bipolar. And I always tied the two together. I'm like, because I was told this when I was a patient in the hospital, I was told this when I went back and I worked there. And that's always what I would see is you can't you can't actually be successful in a career or make any kind of whatever. And I think that that's the thing too is I always felt like for a while I was like, I don't want to share that because I feel like that's bragging. I don't really want to talk about that, but I feel like I was always around the types of people who would make me feel bad for wanting to be proud. Like this is a big accomplishment for me because I thought that I could never do this because I've struggled so much in jobs, you guys. Like I've had so many jobs where I've been fired from, I've quit, I've had just such a bad history that I'm like, this is never going to work. I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to be able to make an impact and help people. And it just was, and I'm actually proud of it. So I feel like I'm not afraid anymore to say that. And, that's how the message I want to leave with you. If you ever have something that you're excited about and you want to celebrate and you have someone who's making you feel a certain way about it, don't take that to heart and just, don't let that stop you from showing up and continuing to make that progress in whatever area it is in your life, whether it's like I'm celebrating a career milestone, I'm celebrating, buying your first home, whatever, I'm celebrating, a relationship, no matter what it is, whatever you think, big or small, don't let someone tell you that you can't celebrate that because that's the thing that I think is important with living with bipolar is there's so many obstacles that we already have that we don't even put in front of ourselves. They're put in front of us by people who tell us you can't do this and you can't have this because bipolar, because and the preconceived notions that some people have about bipolar disorder, that's already put on us before we even get the diagnosis.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. There are so many good things that you just said, but one of the things I want to really highlight is the celebration because this is a huge milestone and you should celebrate it. Girl, I would go all out too. Like, I'll have a photo shoot as well. Like, absolutely. Like, you should celebrate, even if it's like as big as like, having a 2-year anniversary of a book that you wrote and published, even if it's that or something as like, hey, I got out of bed today and I went to work and I got through the day and came back home. Like every win is a win, no matter how big, no matter how small. And I just appreciate you wanting to celebrate as well, because we just live in a culture that is just so full of false humility, where it's like we degrade ourselves as self-deprecation, and we downplay and minimize everything that we go through and what we accomplish, and we never really take a minute to be like, you know what, I'm not bragging about this, it's something that I accomplished and I am proud of that, and I want to celebrate because it could have been worse, and I'm not where I was like 5, 10 years ago, and that's something worth celebrating.
Yeah, I love that mentality that you have, because that's really how I felt with just this year, with wanting to celebrate the book launch, wanting to celebrate my story and putting that out there, because for so many years I didn't do that. I didn't think I could do it. I remember even right before I published my book, I was at this big dinner, and I remember someone at the dinner was saying, "Oh yeah, Paris is publishing her book. It's coming out soon." And then someone's like, "Oh, you're writing a book. What is it about?" And I remember I was so nervous. I was so scared. And I literally responded and I said, "Oh, it's about mental health." And I just was so vague about it because I was still, and I'm sitting there like, why am I afraid to say it? And I feel like that, to answer your last question too, is the difference in myself. Now I'm not like that. Like I'm so open with it, having that openness and not feeling shame because of it. Like I've definitely had jobs where either someone else brings it up or I bring it up, and it gets awkward and it gets uncomfortable. And that's the thing too, is I would tell you guys, like, you don't need to go and shout from the rooftops and tell every single person that you have bipolar disorder. If you feel like it is something that you, and especially with, like the kind of work that with me doing with the podcast and having a book and being an author in this, I'm very open with it. So I don't have that fear anymore of, either like a workplace or like an event of saying, I wrote this story on my experience with bipolar disorder and this is what I learned. Because that's the thing, is you never know someone else's experience. And if you get somebody react a certain way, you don't know their story. What if they had a family member or a friend or someone has a diagnosis, and they had a very, very difficult experience. They don't talk to that person. They're not in their life anymore. And they see someone like me who's, "Oh, I live with bipolar and here's all the podcast and everything." That might be triggering to someone else. So I don't take it personal anymore when I do share what I do and someone does respond a certain way, because I don't know their experience. I don't know where they're sitting at with it unless they want to talk about it. It's not our jobs to convince people and make them, align with our views on it, because we don't walk in their shoes. We don't know what they experience with it. So all we can do is put out what we know, what we've lived through, and what other people have. So that's really what I wanted to do with my book, is really give that inside view on, here's what it looked like, here's all the bad moments, here's all the good ones, and here's where I'm at now, and just really the lessons that I've learned, over the years, and almost hitting 10 years diagnosed next year. So
Mm. Wow. Oh, girl, you are amazing. And speaking of milestones, what is next for you after this milestone?
oh, I love that question. I love it. So after this milestone, a big focus for me is getting back into the work that I used to do earlier this year, over the previous years, before the busy year that I had with the wedding, with all the stuff going on, taking those breaks for a lot of the things. But what's next for me is getting back into that work. So I have a lot of events coming up with NAMI. For you guys who aren't familiar with them, they are the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have a lot of different locations through different states, where they have in-person events, Zoom events, where they have resources for family members who have loved ones with mental illness. It's a really, really great resource. And I've learned a lot from it, from volunteering for them, from doing different events, speaking for them. But what's next for me is just continuing to go out and get back to what I love most, which is meeting other people. And I actually, after my photo shoot, I actually just went down to the mall near me and got my ring cleaned. And I remember I was in the store, and there was the girl, she was working in the store, and she Right? I didn't say anything. I walked in there and she was like, "Girl," she was like, "I'm in the presence of a model. Like, what? Like, look at you." And she was so cute. And I was like, "It's funny you say that because I just got back from a photo shoot." And she was like, "What was your photo shoot?" So I ended up telling her everything. And it was so cool because she, is like 21 years old. And she's like, "I was actually diagnosed with bipolar 2 last year. I was hospitalized." And she was like so open and talking about it with her background and her culture, and how typically in her culture, like her family is like, just pray a lot and it'll go away. Like, just do that and you won't have to face it. So she was like, "I would love to, what's your podcast? Like, I want to connect." This is so cool to me, to meet somebody who's so open. And I think even in her own workplace, she was so open and just was like, "I learned so much and I'm still kind of working through some things." So it just made me so happy because I feel like everything happens for a reason. If I almost didn't go in there. I saw her and now we're connected, and it's really great because I feel like you being open with your story just starts that ripple effect of someone else feeling comfortable opening up about theirs. And maybe they'll go out one day and, share in whatever way they want to, but it really is so impactful. And I didn't really think it was until, you hear from people and they say, "Oh, I just, your story helped me understand my son better," or, "This helped me understand, my wife who was diagnosed." And it's like, I really never, sometimes you sit there and you can start to think like, "Oh, like, does this matter? Like, does me, keep continuing doing the podcast, like, obviously, having this book, is it even going to do anything?" And yes, the answer is yes, because you're always going to have someone who is going to take something away from that. And that's really what I wanted to put out into the world. That's what's next for me, is getting back out into those things that I've taken a break on this year.
Yes. Ah, we love to see it. Definitely love to see it. And can't wait to see all of the lives that you're going to change through your story. I know it. Well, Paris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. But before we wrap up, I have one final question to ask you. So, what advice or words of encouragement do you have for someone who is struggling to manage bipolar disorder?
So, some advice or words of encouragement for someone that is struggling to manage bipolar disorder is to reach out. You feel comfortable, whether it's on Instagram or whatever, like whatever the platform is that you're able to do that, finding someone that you're like, "I want to reach out to," and just talking that way and saying, "Here's where I'm at." Because more often than not, that's really how you start the process, is just saying it out loud, and having that dialogue, open dialogue, either with someone that you're connecting with who is open about their experiences, or even finding a resource like NAMI and going out, because they have a lot of Zoom classes they do that's easily accessible. It's free too, so they have free resources that you can get, connected with other people and just get around people who have that experience that you're going through. Finding those, whether it's support groups, looking for it, places near you, and just reaching out and, starting that conversation or starting it in person. If you have someone that you trust, that either whoever it is in your life, it's your go-to person, opening up to them and saying, "Here's really where I'm at." Because that's really the hesitation that I had myself, is I don't even know how to do it. But, once I finally did, and I remember telling that to my dad and having him, listen and talking through it, it actually did help me understand, okay, well, I can do something about this. So just start the conversation, if you're feeling comfortable for that, or just even writing out your thoughts, getting it on paper, getting it out of your head so it stops overwhelming you, so you can actually see it. Because I do that all the time. Like, I'll go back and reread old journals, and I'm like, wow, like, it just is amazing to me I wanted to understand how did I live so long of my life in this state? And it's
Mm,
like, this is how I thought. This is my perception of the world. I can see it in writing. So doing that is a great way to document it, for sure.
yes, that thank you so much for that. And Paris, where can people find you?
Yes, so the number one place to find me is Instagram. So it's at Live Well Bipolar. You guys can go there, follow me there. All the information is in my bio, where you can see podcast, book, an article about me and all that stuff. But that's the number one place to connect. Shoot me a message. But yeah, I loved this talk. Yeah, the number one place to connect is at Live Well Bipolar on Instagram.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Paris. And I will have the links to all of your contacts, like information and everything, especially the book, in the show notes below. And everyone, stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more exciting updates on the podcast, follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.